The Supreme Court has dealt two major blows to Donald Trump. The first one, of course, has to do with his tax returns, and the second has to do with challenges to, you got it, the 2020 general election, something that apparently he and his lawyers are still unwilling to let go. But let's start off with what we know so far about these decisions. Now, none of the three judges that Trump chose for the court, including Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, publicly objected to the subpoena seeking his guarded tax records or concluded that his reelection defeat was tainted. So again, these two cases, you have these three Supreme Court justices who were unwilling to do Trump's bidding for him. And honestly, I was even surprised by that. I really thought that at least one of them would be willing to stand up for Trump's interests here, but they did not. So previously, the courts ruled that the president is not immune from criminal investigations. Now that had to do with a sitting president. However, he's no longer a sitting president. And what we know is that the Manhattan District Attorney, Cyrus Vance, is very much interested in investigating Donald Trump's taxes for any potential fraud that he may have committed, fraud pertaining to the loans that he obtained, fraud when it comes to his own taxes. Trump previously said the Supreme Court lacked wisdom and courage because of its refusal to take up challenges to the election. That's the second decision that the court made here. He responded to Monday's order concerning his tax records with a statement referring to the continuing political persecution of President Donald J. Trump. So he thinks he's the real victim here. He also wrote this: the Supreme Court never should have let this fishing expedition happen, but they did. This is something which has never happened to a president before. It is all Democrat inspired in a totally Democrat location, New York City and state. Now remember, the reason why his tax returns are going to be investigated is because his own former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, testified under oath that Trump committed tax fraud, and he also committed fraud in order to obtain loans that he had no business obtaining. He would inflate his assets, allegedly, in order to obtain those loans, and then deflate his assets in order to skirt taxes that he should have been paying. So this is gonna be an interesting investigation just because Cyrus Vance will now be able to obtain his tax returns doesn't mean that the public will, although there have been portions of his tax returns leaked already to the press and they've been reported by the New York Times. So Ryan, what do you make of all of this? I never get too excited over someone in a position of power or former person in a position of power really suffering the consequences of their criminality. But it might be a little different with Trump.
I mean, I think it's okay for people to allow themselves a little schadenfreude, to take a little bit of delight in the downfall of somebody they hate, or not necessarily the downfall, but in something so ironically going wrong for somebody. Trump heralds his judicial appointments, district, circuit, and Supreme Court as his great accomplishment. But you can tell that his heart's not in it. Like you can tell that he's excited about all of his court appointments because other Republicans are so excited about it. Like that was never something that he got fired up about. When he saw how excited people got about Gorsuch or about Kavanaugh or about Amy Coney Barrett, then that would excite him because he loves being loved. And if you notice, any time he was at a nadir of his presidency, he would do something about abortion, because he knew the anti-abortion crowd absolutely loved him, and so he would throw them a bone to get them fired up about him, to kind of boost his own spirits. But you could always tell that his heart was never into it, because he wasn't allowed to put onto the court his precise cronies. Michael Cohen, went to prison, not to the Supreme Court. But if it were a true, 100% dictatorship, Michael Cohen would be on the Supreme Court and would have just said, you know what? No, of course, get out of here. Not letting you have the boss's tax returns. And so there's still a semblance of checks and balances in place, and that drives Trump mad. And so, these picks that he put up are going to do exactly what the kind of right-wing movement that put them there wants them to do, but they're not always going to do Trump's bidding. And we can recognize kind of the former and also kind of delight in the latter for a second.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm delighting in it as much as humanly possible, and I have no shame in that. Like, I don't feel bad about that at all. In fact, the only bad feeling I have is just that feeling in the pit of my stomach about how people like Trump never really suffer consequences for their actions, right? So I'm afraid to allow myself to be too celebratory and then later get frustrated and disappointed when justice isn't actually carried out. But I do enjoy the fact that what you're saying appears to be right. I mean, our system of government certainly has some massive flaws. There's no question about that, but there does seem to be a system of checks and balances, as dysfunctional as it might be, in place. And we're not a true dictatorship. If Trump really wanted to be a dictator, he wouldn't be able to do it. And that gives me a little bit of peace, but obviously there needs to be some pretty significant reforms at the same time. I think when it comes to Supreme Court justices, especially the types of Supreme Court justices who were successfully confirmed by Republican presidents, what tends to kind of bind them together, what they tend to agree on, is anything that allows them to rule in favor of a corporation and rule in favor of corporate interests over the best interests of workers and people, right? So I know when it comes to those types of issues, all three of them, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, they'll be in agreement. I mean, they've handed down some pretty vicious pro-corporate judgments in their careers. So I wouldn't be surprised about that. With this though, let's talk a little bit about the election related decision they made here, because they chose not to take up a case involving Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania, which decided to accept mail-in ballots up to 3 days after election day as a result of like the influx of mail-in voting that took place because of the pandemic. Republicans feel that this has been incredibly unfair. Now, if let's say all of those ballots that were accepted 3 days or up to 3 days after the election were thrown out, that would only affect about 10,000 ballots in the state of Pennsylvania. It would not overturn the results of the general election in that state. But nonetheless, it doesn't matter. The Supreme Court decided they're not going to take that case up, which is the second big blow to Donald Trump and his campaign. What do you make of that? I mean, do you think that there's any justification to that case? I mean, there's this concern that unelected state officials are making these decisions on their own, and it's really up to the state legislature to vote and decide on changing their election laws. What's your take on that?
Right. So what if people are concerned about whether or not the people making the decision are elected, they should know that judges in Pennsylvania are actually elected as are election commissioners, as are the state Senate and the state House. So, pretty much across the board, the people who made these decisions, who moved, the state legislature, the Republican state legislature that moved towards the mail voting, the Democratic governor who signed it, this bipartisan court, but Democratic controlled since 2017, court that approved it. We're all elected by voters over the years. Yes, there was some ambiguity about if your ballot is postmarked on election day, how much time are we going to give it to come into the election office before we say that we can't count it? And to me, you really ought to give as much leeway as possible. If you voted on election day, and because Trump decided to destroy the post office and it didn't get there till 6 days later, that you still legally cast that vote. Like that's what this country is about: is every person having the right to vote. But that's my take. Whatever. That was litigated in court through multiple different iterations through judges who happen to be elected. I don't think you have to have judges be elected to have them be legitimate, but in Pennsylvania they happen to be. And like you said, the whole thing is so absurd because if Trump won every single one of these votes, or Biden won every single one of these votes, and you toss them all out, Biden still wins Pennsylvania. Even if you flip Pennsylvania, Biden still wins. So it's like, what are we doing at this point? You might as well be litigating the 1932 election in the state of Pennsylvania, because it's going to have just as much influence on who's president right now. So the court was like, the court had 800 to 800 different reasons to just say, you know what, this is absurd. This is not the thing that we're gonna waste our political capital on.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.